Yeah, it's scary.
Joanne Crowley.
Yeah,
That's
yes,
very
it's
scary.
really
Yeah,
scary.
yes,
So, yeah,
absolutely.
My biggest
this,
fear.
but
Recording in progress.
Hello? I'm Kathy Williams, the Yarmouth Town Planner, and welcome to our Hazard Mitigation Community Meeting. We're just going to give a little presentation and kind of open it up for your thoughts. We do have some
Just
people online.
use a microphone, please.
I should know that by now. Kathy Williams, Town Planner. Welcome to the Hazard Mitigation Community Meeting. We're going to give a little presentation here to give you guys an idea of what the process is all about, and then we're going to open it up for some questions from you guys, any comments you might have. So just to give you a little idea what the agenda is this evening, but I do want to make note of the fact that this evening we have with us Martha Hevener from the Cape Cod Commission, who is helping us with her expertise on the development of the plan. We also have a hazard mitigation team. We have a couple members here in person, Joanne Crowley and Steve Crum. We were looking to get representatives from the business community, different civic associations to participate in the development of the plan, as well as we also have on our team a bunch of staff from the police and fire, DPW engineering, water conservation, and DNR. So what we're going to be going over this evening is what the hazard mitigation plan really is, the purpose and the process, what needs to be included in the plan itself, because FEMA is pretty particular on what needs to be included in a hazard mitigation plan. We'll talk about the relative important natural hazards to the town of Yarmouth. We did complete a public survey recently. We're going to go over very briefly some of the results from that. We also have identified some plan goals and things that we want to achieve with the plan. Identifying a bunch of existing capabilities. This is not the first time we're doing anything. We have a lot of things already in our back pocket that we're working on and our capabilities that help us with hazard mitigation. And then we're going to talk a little bit about some of the mitigation action items that the team has been talking about and thinking about and kind of get people's ideas on that, as well as talking about some next steps. So what is a hazard mitigation plan? This is something that FEMA is looking for the local municipalities to develop kind of a strategic plan to identify and reduce the risks of natural disasters. This is something that helps us with our overall community resiliency, but it also makes us eligible for certain FEMA funding, which is always important. We are supplementing a lot of the work that we do in the town of Yarmouth through various grants, so lots of times these plans are important to accessing those. Excuse me. Hazard mitigation plan purpose, really the purpose is what we're trying to do is reduce the impacts and risks on our community from natural disasters, on the environment, property, our economy, and all the people in Yarmouth by implementing some very strategic mitigation action items, which we'll talk about later. So what is kind of the mitigation planning framework? One of the first steps that we did was developing that mitigation planning team, which I mentioned. And we've discovered some various outreach strategies, the survey that I mentioned, this community meeting this evening, and we're also going to be having another one later in the process. We're taking a look at the risk assessments. We're taking a look at the various natural hazards that are important to the town of Yarmouth. Then we're reviewing, again, as I mentioned, our capabilities, and then really getting an understanding of the risks and vulnerabilities that we have in town, which will then help us to start identifying the goals and the action items that we need to implement to help mitigate those things. And also talking about how you would adopt the plan. There's a formal process that FEMA wants you to adopt the plan. And then there's also a whole process with regard to keeping the plan current and reviewing it on an annual basis. And then you swoop back down and you review and update every 5 years. So it's always a never-ending process. So just briefly, this is the plan content, just a table of contents from the existing 2017 hazard mitigation plan. It kind of outlines just a format, table format of what we're going to need to be sure that we're incorporating in our updated plan. So one of the things we wanted to look at, what are some of the natural hazards? What does the state want us to be looking at for natural hazards? And they kind of put them in different categories. One of them is changes in precipitation, so things like inland flooding, drought, and landslide. You'll notice a little star next to inland flooding because that was something that was identified as being a real concern in the town of Yarmouth. Drought was something that was seen as likely happening, but landslides, not so much. So that's why it's a little shaded. It's probably not something we're going to put much effort into. Rising temperatures, extreme temperatures, hot and cold, wild wildfires, and then we're seeing a lot more invasive species action. So those are all things that are likely or highly likely to be happening in the town of Yarmouth. And then extreme weather, which I think we're all very familiar with extreme weather. Hurricanes, tropical storms, severe winter storms. And those two stars there, again, indicate that those are something that the town residents are very concerned about. Tornadoes, that's something that we weren't really thinking about back in 2017, but we've had a little bit of a wake-up call on that one with a tornado. And then other extreme weather, which might be thunderstorms, high winds, or really like saturation type precipitation. And then you're looking at sea level rise with coastal erosion and coastal flooding. Those, again, are two things that are important in the town of Yarmouth. Tsunamis, not so much, thankfully. And then some non-climate interaction is earthquakes. Even though there may be some earthquakes in Massachusetts, it's really not something, or New England, it's really not something that's impacting us in here on the Cape. So what are some of the things that we looked at in the survey? So we asked people what were they particularly concerned about. Let me just get here. I've identified like the 5 top were, and then it's not going to surprise any of you. It's coastal flooding, storm surge, coastal erosion and shoreline change, hurricane and tropical storms, flooding from precipitation, and then those severe winter storms. Tornadoes, concerns with tornadoes did go up from 5% in 2017 to 10.6% this year, and then drought went from a 6% concern in 2017 to a 25% concern now. So I think we're seeing some changes in people's understanding as things have changed here in town. So what are people concerned about the possibility of natural disaster impacts? There's been a lot more people who are extremely concerned or somewhat concerned about natural disasters, and fewer people who are not concerned at all from 2017. Just kind of showing this is really something that people are starting to really pay attention to and be very concerned about. So we asked people what were some of the actions that they had taken to be more hazard resistant, and the top 5 were like pruning trees on their property. I know I've done that myself. Signing up for Code Red, again, done that myself. Improving some drainage on their property, making sure things are draining away from their homes, removing debris or any hazardous materials. And then the 5th one was actually purchasing a generator. I think we've had some issues where we've had extended periods of loss of electricity, so we've had more residents purchasing generators. And what are the steps that you're really looking for your local government to take to help reduce some of those? And they're looking for improved drainage, I think mainly on our roadways, constructing resilient infrastructure, again, the roads and the town infrastructure, continuing to work with our regional partners to prepare and quickly recover from any type of natural disaster, making sure that we're pruning trees on town property, and then again, applying for grants for all of these different mitigation projects that we have. As I mentioned earlier, we have been very successful in getting various grants for that. Some of the other questions that were asked had to do with the number of respondents who were in a flood zone. 25% they were in a flood zone, but 18% said they did not have, or were the only ones who had flood insurance. So there's a group of people there who are in a flood zone, but they're not purchasing flood insurance. The respondents did skew a little bit older. We had about 60% of the respondents were 60 years and older. Most of them were year-round residents and owned their own homes. And most people were wanting to be informed or engaged via either direct email, which they need to sign up for, or on the town website. So it's always good to know how we can get the word out to people and how they best like to get their information. So one of the first things we did is what are the goals of this plan? What do we want to do with these action items? And so we're really interested in reducing and preventing loss of life, obviously an injury from any natural hazards. We want to mitigate any financial losses that might come to the community from a hazard. Reducing impacts to our critical facilities and our public infrastructure. We want to keep that going or get that back up and going as quickly as possible. And while we're coming up with all these different mitigation measures, we want to be sure that we're being sensitive to the natural features, historic resources, and our community character. We don't want to just build a giant wall around everything. We also want to be sure that we're increasing public awareness through education. And then whenever we're doing any type of municipal planning, we always want to encourage people to think about hazard mitigation, climate mitigation, and resiliency in those plans, and also trying to foster more regional collaborations for solutions. And then again, one of the nice things about the hazard mitigation plan is it does position the town to seek and apply for funding opportunities to implement these strategies. So as I mentioned before, we weren't starting from ground zero. We have a bunch of existing capabilities, and they kind of get broken down in the plan to these 5 different categories. Town plans and policies. We have a lot of town plans and policies. We're currently updating our local comprehensive plan. We recently updated the open space and rec plan. It sounds like they're going to be working on the emergency management plan really soon. We've completed a municipal vulnerability program report, as well as a climate change vulnerability assessment that looked at all of our critical facilities and came up with some adaptation plans. We have a regional transportation plan, and we also have a county-wide wildfire protection plan, which does need to be updated. Different types of land uses and building regulations and bylaws that we have in place. We obviously have floodplain zoning district. We have adopted the flood insurance rate maps. We have wetland-specific Yarmouth wetland regulations and also stormwater management bylaws. And of course, we have the state building code and fire codes that all play a major role on any development, especially the building code with any development in a flood hazard area. And then there's also different staffs and boards that play a role in our existing capabilities. Obviously, the police and fire and their emergency management is huge. DNR, Division of Natural Resources and Conservation, they're really looking at protecting our wetlands and also coastal resiliency projects, as does the DPW with infrastructure. Our building department, they really look at storm recovery and damage assessment to see whether buildings can go back in. You can go back into a building and what needs to happen there. And then planning addresses zoning changes and subdivisions. Financial, that's always the big one. We can have big, great plans, but if we don't have the money to do it, we're not going to get her done. So we do have a capital improvement plan, which does annually, department heads can go and ask for some funding through that, but we have been very successful with grants from the MVP program, Coastal Zone Management, NOAA, and NRCS have really been helping us out a lot. And then the last one is just different mitigation activities that we undertake. I mean, it's something as simple as getting emergency generators at more facilities that we have, the whole education and public outreach that we do, having DPW stay on top of their stormwater, and looking at the coastal infrastructure. We're mutual aid, all of these different things that help people out. If we were to have a disaster, then we could all work together to quickly get through that. So kind of taking all these things into consideration, the mitigation goals, the existing capabilities, we want to look at different types of action items that we can take that actually can go into the implementation plan. And there's really 4 different categories of the types of structures. One is planning and regulation. Second is structure and infrastructure projects. The third is natural systems protection. And then the fourth is education and awareness. So as I mentioned, the hazard mitigation planning team has been working very hard, and they've met several times, and staff has also met several times to try and identify some of the things that we are not only currently doing, but also things that we might want to be doing in the future in order to address these issues. So local comprehensive plan, making sure that we're incorporating these hazard mitigation action items within that plan that's currently being updated. When we're looking at future wetland bylaw regulations, maybe we want to start looking at protecting coastal resiliency zones, start looking at those sea level rise maps and what are the next areas that are going to need to be protected. Looking at the community rating system, evaluate participation in that, and that's something that can, depending on your level of participation, can reduce flood insurance rates in the town. Continuing with the MVP, there's a whole MVP 2.0 program that we would need to participate in, and that will help us remain eligible for those MVP grants. There's a fire station feasibility study investigating possibly relocating fire station number 1, which is in a hurricane slosh zone, and maybe getting that into a place that's a little bit safer. We're also working... Oh, I'm sorry, it's on Old Main Street. Yeah, sorry. I just know these things off the top of my head. I apologize. And then also a neighborhood emergency egress study. This is a study that's going on now. It's a 2-year study to look at how sea level rise and flooding is impacting the different areas south of Route 28. And that's our heavily area that has a lot of special flood hazard areas in it. And then a disaster debris management plan. We had been using, I think, at one time the former drive-in site, but now we have a community park there. So we need to come up with a plan for debris disposal after storm events. And as I mentioned earlier, updating that emergency management plan, which kind of is more of a police, fire, emergency operations, but they'll also look at all hazards, so even man-made hazards like terrorism and that type of thing in that. And then we have water restriction measures. I mean, that's something we, a couple years ago, enacted because of the droughts that were coming along, and so we need to do water restrictions as needed, and then continuing with the education about that for people. And the next here is on structures and infrastructure projects. We're working with the Friends of Bass River on the Upper Bass River Tidal Restoration Project. That's replacing the 2 undersized culverts at North Dennis Road and Weir Road. We're also working with Friends of Bass River again on the Kroll Pond or the Run Pond Tidal Restoration. That is on South Shore Drive. I think sometimes it's called Stinky Pond. I hate to say that. But there's a culvert that runs underneath Smuggler's Beach parking lot, which is really restricting the tidal flushing of that pond. And different culvert replacements. Thatcher Shore Road, I think it's an undersized culvert and it's causing some flooding on that roadway. Continuing with our Packet Landing Resiliency Project, where we've already come up with, looked at different concepts and evaluated different opportunities to improve the resiliency of that marina where we store our harbor master and all of our safety watercraft go there. So looking at elevating the lower parking lot, increasing the height of the revetment wall, and then and the wharf there at the marina to make that more sustainable during events. We also need to start looking at our coastal structures. We have a lot of town seawalls and jetties that need a little bit of attention. And then as we're talking about all these great things that we're doing, maybe we need to expand our capabilities. With the more grants that we have, there's management with that, there's applying for them, and then there's just more coastal resiliency projects. We really need to evaluate whether we need a new staff position or positions if we want to continue to move aggressively with some of these projects. And then natural systems and protections, one of the simplest things I think is acquiring properties and things that would like protect the wetlands, would allow for salt marsh migration as the sea level rises, give the marsh a place to go if a parcel's flood prone, or if it allows us to do some stormwater enhancements. And then also the prescribed burn program, that's really a controlled fire within the woodlands. That's really helps to reduce wildfire by reducing the amount of fuel, so to speak, for a wildfire, but it also has the advantage of improving wildlife habitat. We were doing that before COVID. It kind of went to the wayside because they were having some difficulty finding the people with the right certifications to do it, but I know that the fire department is very interested in starting that back up. Also with the Friends of Bass River and part of that tidal restoration project I mentioned earlier, there's also a wetland restoration project, bog restoration on the upper reaches of the Bass River. The Cape Cod Hospital is also working on the Bayview Bog Restoration Project. The town is basically at this time just providing staff participation in some of those. Dredging, we're really working hard to get that permit, the dredging in the upper reaches of the Bass River, which I don't think have really ever been done. I believe that's from north of the Route 28 bridge. And then invasive species management. What can we do on town land, continuing with removal, and also including them in town projects? I mean, the Parkers River Landing, there was a lot of invasive species management that happened there, as well as the West Yarmouth Parks, Chasebrook Park, and Mill Creek Park when those are being redeveloped. And then education and awareness. I think we're actually doing a pretty good job with education and awareness and providing materials for people. So there's not too much here because it's actually in our existing capabilities because we're already doing it. So some of the public outreach is now that we have a community communications director is maybe increasing social media posts and radio spots on natural hazards to get the word out there. And the fire department has a really great educational team, and they'll do presentations on a variety of safety topics, which does include storm preparedness. And so what are the next steps? A lot. We need to develop a full draft of the hazard mitigation plan, and input like this is very helpful. And then once that's developed, we'll have a public comment period and then a second public community meeting to present that draft. We'll update it a little bit depending on comments we get, and then we need to present that to the select board before we submit it to MEMA for their review. And if they're happy, they will then submit it to FEMA for their review, and then it comes back to the town, and the select board needs to formally adopt it. We were able to get a planning grant for this through MEMA, so that ends at the end of 2025. So that's something we really are pushing to have this process completed by then. Here we go. Questions and comments. But for more information, it's very simple email address there. I'm trying, the full survey results are there, and I'll put up this PowerPoint presentation and that type of thing as a go-to place for when we have future meetings and stuff. It'll all be up on there. So opening it up to any comments anybody might have or any questions. In person first, maybe? Why don't you come up, Christine?
Gotta find what I wrote down here. First of all, thank you very much for doing this. I'm Christine Greeley from West Yarmouth, actually in the Hyannis Park area. I think there's a couple of things that have been a concern for a while down in our area in particular, and that has to do with Bayview Beach and a lot of the flooding and things that take place there already. And when you take a look at the erosion from what used to be quite a beach area there, that has gone since the high-speed ferries and coming in and things. And one of the things that we've also noticed, and you notice it now for July 4th, is the erosion from Calmus Beach, where the piping plovers used to be, and from Calmus Beach in Hyannis on the other side of the harbor, and then the accretion onto Great Island, which is why they're now holding the 4th of July fireworks on Labor Day weekend, because the plovers are over on Great Island. And so I think there's been some very significant changes, certainly in Lewis Bay and the coast of Lewis Bay, and the flooding into some of those areas, particularly, as I said, Bayview Beach. It is also a problem. I didn't know there was another stinky pond in Yarmouth, because we named the pond that sits between Bayview and sort of borders the beach and then on Somerset, fills and does not empty because there's some significant drainage problems already with the piping underneath a Bayview parking lot and all. But the Bayview parking lot in particular will be full of water on many, many occasions, to the point where people stop and have to turn around in some way because you can't really progress further. But as I said, over the years, having been here since '81, I've seen the whole erosion of what had been a fairly large beach area in front of the parking lots, and even there had been a boat ramp there and things. All of that has disappeared, and now you're almost sitting, if you're against the guardrail, you're almost sitting, right on the water. You're getting a good water view. And I think that's been a really big concern. And also there were a number of the sort of town ways to water, or the ends of streets, that occur within Hyannis Park, including the end of Glenwood Street, which this week, with all the rain, has been flooded, several houses up. And I know you've looked at different kinds of things that maybe have to happen, but it's of concern because a lot of the area coming through Hyannis Park is actually an alternate route over 28 to get into the hospital. So if there was some problem or complication on Route 28, so keeping some of the trees cleared, and some of the other things that bother us a great deal are the overgrown branches and trees in the power lines. I think that that's very significant. And it happened a couple of years ago after one of our big storms. They actually had some crews up from down south who were cutting, and helping our utility people up here. And one of them said to me, because I happened to stop and thank them, they said, "My God," he said, "down where we are in our state," he said, "the rule is you stand under the power line and you have to be able to see the sky." He said, "I don't understand how this is going on here." And so I think that in terms of the whole issue of the, energy issues and the power loss and all for the community, because not everybody has a generator. And also when those trees come down or bring the wires down, you quite often can't pass on those roads or help people evacuate. So that's a very, very big concern. I'm also very pleased to say that Chase Park has been a beautiful example of your working on the invasive species projects to get those things out of there and to create an environment there that's it's going to be a lot better, I think, for erosion and other kinds of things taking place. And the final thing would be with the Bayview Bog. Clearly, having been there in '81 and seeing the ponds and things that were out there then, because we used to go ice skating in the winter on them, those have long gone. And unfortunately, there's been a lot of unfortunate things with encampments and even a fentanyl or kind of drug operation that was going on out there that was a real hazardous problem. So I'm really glad to see the partnership that the town has had with the Cape Cod Hospital. I think the Cape Cod Commission and other people have been involved with it. So some of those we think are going well. But to see the differences in the shoreline on Lewis Bay, all the way around the bay, but in particularly around some of the harbor entrance and things, has been a big concern to many of us. but thank you for your work. This is an impressive piece of work, and I know it's been done a lot of work from a lot of people in the town and citizens and things like that. So thank you very much, and thank you for the presentation.
I don't know if anyone else is
Sure,
first.
Kathy. Sorry, I should have let you go first.
Oh, no, that's all right. Thank you to the commission and Kathy Williams, our town planner. I'm Joanne Crowley, planning board member of the hazards mitigation team. It was a great presentation. Thank you both. It clarified a lot for me. Our first meeting a couple of months ago was an eye-opener, and it now is much more focused, and I do appreciate it. Again, I think the focus to the degree that we can on coastal resiliency is the key thing that I think is important. Bass River and all of our beaches, Parkers River, and of course Lewis Bay, are all under threat, no matter what. And our ability to respond to disasters when those particular locations are under siege will be really important. So I just wanted to thank you both for excellent presentation. I don't know if we have people in the audience that might like to chime in too, so we'd like to hear from them as well. So I'll leave it at that. So thank you so much.
All good. So anyone online, if you would like to provide a comment or ask a question, if you could just raise your hand, and then we can have Liam unmute you and ask your question. Liam, can you, there you go, Yvonne? Unmute.
Yes, I have a question about the increasing of the culverts and increasing flooding in the neighborhood by doing that. I was wondering, has that been considered? I know you're trying to do things for nature, but sometimes if it backfires and kind of flows into the community there, and then they're in a bind. How can we, who can we come to help us, find some solutions? My name's Yvonne McFarland, and I have a home that's in Great Island Ocean Club Homeowners Association, and we are finding that we are having issues that we didn't have before in our community, flooding up the streets close to Seagull Beach Road.
I think it's almost two different questions. One of them is like if you're doing a much larger tidal restoration project like they're doing at North Dennis Road and Weir Road, there's a very detailed hydraulic analysis that gets done, and sometimes
Microphone's not on.
the other one's on, Kathy, I think. I can't seem to get the mics right today. I'm sorry, I don't know if you had heard what I was saying, but if there's a larger tidal restoration project like the North Dennis Road or the Weir Road, they do very, very detailed hydrologic studies in order to determine the opening that could be allowed without causing excessive flooding. So it's very detailed, and lots of times the opening will actually be smaller than what would be better if we wanted to be fully open, but we know that we can't be flooding structures and that type of thing. I think your particular concern, I don't know a lot about that, but I think it was replacing a couple culverts on Seagull Road, kind of in kind, and I'm not sure what is actually causing some of the concerns in your neighborhood, and some of it might be just an increase in sea level rise to a certain extent, kind of coming over from Lewis Pond over Seagull. I do know that Amanda Lima, the town engineer, is fully aware of the concerns. I don't know if you had any further questions.
No, we had a solution to help decrease it, but we couldn't use it because something about some ruling of moving water on town land, and we just wanted to stop it from coming in through a fence opening. Um,
Yeah, I think because of that particular location, different type of mitigations might be somewhat limited. I don't know if it was something through the Conservation Commission or whether that was something that maybe the town engineer had talked about. Did you go to the Conservation Commission?
yes, we did, and then that's something about because it was town land, we could not block the water from coming into our complex because it would somehow be against rules of moving water off of town land. It was but we were just trying to keep it from coming into our community, and it wasn't really it was a ruling that we really didn't quite understand. It didn't make sense. We just wanted to stop the water a little bit of it, and not put water onto not pump it out from us and put it on there. Just wanted to stop it from coming into our complex.
I'm afraid I don't know all the details on that, but that's certainly something, I can check in with the town engineer, but I do know that she has been trying to come up with some types of solutions for some concerns that have been expressed there.
Okay, thank you.
I think Tom Nicanello?
Yes, good evening. First of all, thank you for all your hard work in our community trying to stay afloat, I guess would be a good word tonight. I agree with Ms. Greeley about Lewis Bay. And, we seem to be having an extreme hard time with the road that goes to Great Island. And as you're probably all aware, that it got washed out pretty much last year. And each year it keeps to be getting worse and worse. And pretty soon Great Island will be a great island. And that is definitely going to change the whole look and the whole structure of Lewis Bay. You're going to have the water coming in from Nantucket Sound, breaking through that little strip of land, going right into Lewis Bay. That is extremely deteriorating by each major storm that we have. And to pick up on some of the other stuff that Ms. Greeley was saying, we've been talking about, Thatcher Park and Smuggler's Beach for a long time. And how do we move this stuff up the ladder so it gets done? If we're still talking about it 25 years later, and DPW, as you just said, is constantly looking at our infrastructure, well, I think 25 years is a long time to look at it. So thank you very much.
Yeah, I think the issue with the smugglers is I believe that they actually had it worked out with Army Corps where they would pay 75% of a plan, and we needed to vote the 25% local match, and it got voted down. So that's my understanding of what happened. But we are trying again through the Friends of Bass River, and we're working with the DNR, Division of Natural Resources and Army Corps, to see if we can't come up with at least a preferred concept and then start looking at potential funding opportunities. So I don't know if anyone else online has any comments. Oh. I'm going to mess up that name. Sakalis?
Oh, yes. That's okay. I was just wanting to know, we live over on the other side of Lewis Bay by Standish Way,
Okay.
and Colonial Acres Beach. And last year we had times where we have video of the mailman not being able to get down Pilgrim Road. The water now just kind of comes over where the town docks are, and there's just so much water that's just going onto Pilgrim Road. At one point, it was even coming down Standish Way. The town docks that were in the parking lot were also being flooded. They were moving, and we're just we've talked a couple of times to different people, and with all the protection of nature, we're not able to rebuild any seawalls over there, and it's really becoming a huge problem for us over on that part of town.
I do think that maybe that might get looked at a little bit more closely during that emergency egress study that's being done, which is looking at different flooding situations south of Route 28. So I'd like to think that that would be included in that analysis.
Okay, and but what does that exactly mean? Because we've been talking to town hall for a couple of years now regarding the water that for that specific area.
Have you been talking to DPW and engineering, or who have you been?
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Yep, and conservation, and I guess there's all these laws now. There's beachfront and riverfront, and lots of things to protect the wildlife, which is understandable. I mean, we like them too, but at the same token, we even right now, even when it rains heavy, we can't park our car in front of our houses down the end of Pilgrim Road. The sewers and everything, they just back up, and the whole end of the road is flooded.
Okay.
That's been years happening.
Yeah, I think that's a situation. The only reason I mentioned the study is because if they identify certain areas, they might start moving forward with maybe some ideas on different things that they can do
Okay.
to mitigate it. I do know that, talking about maybe raising some of the roads is something that we've been looking at as a potential way of mitigating it. We're not going to hold back sea level rise, so it's something that if we can do something to help mitigate, that's kind of what we're looking to do. I'm sorry, I'm not particularly familiar with that particular problem, and maybe what engineering might have some thoughts about.
Okay. All right. Well, I do appreciate all your time and doing this, so thank you so much.
All right, thank you. I think Kim?
Hi, yes. Again, I agree with everyone here. Thank you for this work that you're all doing. I just want to follow up and just support in what many others have said here. So I also live in the Colonial Acres, Mill Creek, Lewis Bay area and have had significant flooding from the rising waters. And I guess in addition to the other things that you spoke about, I've heard that Hyannis Harbor is approving to move forward with putting in a seawall. And I was just curious if the town is partnering with them at all to ensure that whatever they're doing doesn't now have greater impact on all of us, between Great Island, Colonial Acres, and all other areas within Lewis Bay. So I just wasn't sure if there was any plan there.
That's a very good question. I'm not familiar with that either. I would like to think that the Division of Natural Resources is on that, but I can certainly check on that and find out what's going on.
That would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, that sometimes it's like you're solving a problem over here, but you're just creating a worse problem in another location. And that's kind of the reason why a lot of those revetments and that type of thing, the hard structures, are not being allowed anymore, is because it's just pushing the problem somewhere else. So,
I don't know what happened to the Zoom on my screen.
don't know what that means. Are we frozen?
Do we coordinate our HM, we coordinate our hazard management plan with the county, right? And Hyannis should be doing the same thing, and that should be where your systemic effects, what is it, the consequences of
yeah.
unexpected.
Yeah. Pete Malpass is just asking whether our hazard mitigation plan goes to the county and then they get kind of, and they start looking at crosstown lines, and Martha's shaking her head no. This is good to know. This is good information, because then I can't believe there's not someone in the town of Yarmouth who knows all about this.
They logged into our Zoom account or the Zoom account at MUC at the DPW, so it kicked me off.
Okay. So are we, so what is,
We're back now, but
we're back?
they
So,
have to leave that meeting. I don't know.
okay, well, we're almost done, so maybe if we can get off, we can let Recreation Commission use this webinar line. So I don't know if anyone else, I'm sorry, everybody, for the disruption. If anyone else online has any comments? I don't see any hands raised. I don't see any hands raised in Town Hall. So I think what we're going to do is just thank everybody for participating, and you know where I live. If you have any further comments, kwilliams@yarmouth.ma.us. If you have any comments, and like I say, I'll also be keep on that www.yarmouth.ma.us/HMP for Hazard Mitigation Plan. That's where all the information is going to be on future meetings that we might be having, also being able to look at the draft and providing comments on the draft. So thank you, everyone, for coming.
Excellent job, Kathy. Really good. Thank you, Martha. Appreciate your work.
There's so much I don't know.